Have a slightly different video for you today. The barbecue hasn't been out for a while now because we've been having some work done on our house and our kitchen in particular, which means that I can start moving on to some other Ninja products when the weather isn't so great outside. If you have watched any of those videos, you'll be familiar with the corner where our little fig tree stands, where I do the filming, and also that I was looking for something a little bit more permanent to put the Ninja, especially during the summer months. So what we're looking at the moment is half of an apex roof from an Arbour, in particular a Rowlinson party Arbour, which retails at anywhere between £500 and £600. And I found this one on Facebook for £40, where the chap who bought it off was incredibly helpful and helped me dismantle it and get it back home in one piece, mostly. So as you can see, signs of wear and tear and a few bits of rot here and there, especially on the roof panel. So there's going to be 2 panels ultimately that needed replacing and some extra kind of running repairs, because what we're looking at here is the underside of the roof, and so that's the bit that we're going to see, so it needs to look the best. To do this job, I should say I am not a DIY expert, nor do I have a wood workshop. We have some basic tools and we have various bits from the jobs we've had done around our home, which we hoped would be enough to kind of restore this to its former glory or somewhere close. Plan of attack was going to be firstly obviously to clean the panels and see what we were working with, and I was going to do that with a jet wash. The chap who bought it off said he'd used water-based paints, and actually using the jet wash could potentially get it back to wood, which wasn't the case, but I'm actually quite glad about that because that means that the wood got protected. So rather than trying to sand everything back to a perfect finish to then varnish it, what it meant was that I could sand it back to a good enough finish to then take paint. So aside from the roof panel, we've obviously got the trellis on the back there. Other half of the roof panel, we got the backboard there in the background, and we have the 2 side panels along with the other supporting beams. These are collapsible tables, so we can either have them as set side panels or as tables, and the wood there was actually fairly heavy and sturdy, so I was just a bit mindful that when it wasn't together, as you could probably just about make out, it started to turn the wood and make it split a little bit, and unfortunately, as you saw there, that leg was starting to rot on the bottom. My partner in crime and the DIY expert in our house is my lovely fiance, and she gave some really good ideas. Firstly, that we bought some fence post feet, so the metal ones, for these to sit in, and she had the genius idea of putting some gravel in the bottom of them for drainage, and also what it meant is that we could tweak the height so that we could get the arbour as level as possible, because where we're putting it is just compact dirt with some artificial grass on the top, which we did as a kind of short-term solution. So that was top idea number 1. Idea number 2 was that if we were to felt the roof using some leftover materials, then I wouldn't have to sand each panel on the top of the roof as well, which was a very good idea, and also gave a little bit of extra protection from the conditions. As you can see here, I'm not filming every step of this. What I'm showing you here is the roof panel after I've replaced 2 of the slats on there and cut off the rotten bit of the supporting beam there and replaced it. So I will make that pretty with some wood filler later on, which I packed in there, allowed to dry, and just sanded back and painted. Aesthetically, I'm also going to run some pieces of wood around there, and what we're looking at there is the mouse sander that we used for all of the sanding work on all of these pieces. It got some good use, and I went through quite a lot of the heads before I realised that the Velcro on there wasn't sticking properly. So rather than the heads needing replacing, it was actually the Velcro that needed replacing. So we kind of ran it into the ground and glued various sanding heads onto the mouse sander just to get this completed, because honestly it was ready pretty much for the bin. We didn't want to spend a load of money refurbishing this, so in terms of materials, that looked like 3 pots of paint. So we had 1 seagrass, 2 cream, and then everything else was just from bits that we had lying around. So I'm going to use some beading to run around the edges there, because as you can probably see, this panel pretty much fell to pieces under the rigour of moving it around, and where there was some beading in there, it rotted away. So as a temporary fix, there's a couple of offcuts of pieces of wood just wedged into there just to keep it in position. The beading is more aesthetic than structural, really, just to give it a nice finish, because again we're looking at the underside of the roof there. So once it had been jet washed, it came up looking better, and it showed me the bits that needed a little bit more attention. So I'm the type of DIY that likes to start a job and finish it as soon as possible, and so this was actually a bit of a learning experience, just to take my time, because it was a bit of a back burner project, just to take my time with and actually learn a couple of things as I went. I will say, so although this video makes it look like I'm sanding straight onto our lovely picnic table, I did cover this with dust sheets for the sanding and the painting so that it didn't damage it. And there's the good old mouse sander that got some hours of work. And as you can see, rather than getting this back to wood, I've just sanded it to a degree that it could take paint. So that was quite a coarse grit. Again, not being a DIY expert, I can't tell you the specific one because I'm doing the audio afterwards, because I did do videos as I went along, but they ended up being over an hour and a lot of repetition, so I'm doing just a kind of summary of the before and after and the key steps of the project, which I think all in all, after battling the good British weather, somewhere in the region of probably 4 or 5 weeks, days here and there, of fundamentally sanding, painting and making good. So as you can imagine, there was a couple of screws and fittings that were either painted in or rusted in, sheared heads on screws, things like that. So we needed to hacksaw those out. And the tools that we had to hand were quite basic, so I did have a circular saw actually that helped with cutting some of the wood. We did have a staple gun because we'd refelted our shed, and as you can see there, the felt that we thought we were going to use wasn't quite big enough for the job. So thankfully we did have someone find someone or a roll at the bottom of their shed, which was more than enough to do the job, which is very much appreciated. As you can see here, the extent of the rot on the worst leg there. So that, as I say, was a combination of, rather than sawing it back and trying to replace it for such an important part of the structure, you just kind of used some wood filler just to give it a slightly better finish, albeit that it was going to sit in a metal foot. And then the other genius idea that we had there, so we, my fiance, was to use some plastic waterproofing and just again staple that around the bottom of the leg, just to give it a little bit of extra protection against the elements. So lots of sanding, and then of course repainting over the course of a couple of weeks, which actually I found quite enjoyable. You can see how many heads there I've used on the sander. So rather than going through various courses of grits to get the perfect finish, it was always going to be painted. Didn't want to kind of botch it, but also, you know, not to get this to a pristine finish. And hopefully when you see it at the end of this video, you'll agree that that turned out fairly well. So we now skipped on to a completed panel. So whilst I wanted to do everything in order and do all the sanding, then do all the painting, then put it back together, I did want to make sure that the roof panels could be restored to a decent enough standard that we'd want it in our garden. Otherwise the rest of it would be a bit of a waste of time. So you can see there that the extra pieces of wood, pliable wood, have screwed into place just to run alongside those supporting beams to give this a nicer finish. And where those started to split a little bit because it's quite thin, I again used good old wood filler just to kind of smooth that over. So it's very technical, I smushed it in with my finger and then gave it a light sanding and then painted it. Same with the repair to the middle running panel. Is there again some wood filler in there, sanded and painted. So you see in the finished video that I do run some artificial trellis with the flowers on, artificial flowers I should say, on a trellis underneath the roof panels. And that wasn't that I needed to hide all the imperfections, it's that I had some left over and it seemed to make sense. So the idea was to get certainly the underside to a level of finish that we'd be happy with, given that that's what we'd be seeing when we were sat in there. Because it does double up as both a seating area and a barbecue enclosure. So the original party arbour comes with a collapsible bench, which wasn't on this particular one, but we not really lost out with that, because we can either have a couple of chairs in there, or as we've done, we put the bench set underneath. And so the grand reveal is the finished product. So as you can see, I've put the trellis on the back and sides there. We did already have this trellis that we'd purchased. It's originally going to go on the stone wall you see behind you, which would have been a pain to drill in. So it actually made life a lot easier to be able to just tie it on there with some garden twine. We got all the posts sat in those metal feet, and as you can see, I've positioned it so that just one side of the table is operational. So the other one can lift up. I just felt that the weight of them on both sides and the wood that supports it, it had taken a bit of a battering, and honestly didn't really need two tables. So if we're sat in there chilling out, then that would just be to rest drinks and whatnot, or when barbecuing, just to put a few things on there. So the roof, as you can imagine, the apex was a bit of a pain to get up there. It did sit quite nice and flush, but you probably saw there was just a little bit, about a millimetre of gap. So we did put an extra piece of felt on there. And so I'm left with the job on the sides there, where you can see they're still a bit dog-eared, is to get a piece of wood just as a kind of fascia and a finish. So you can see that's not the width of the whole gap, it does overlap. Then we got the apex pieces just to finish that off, and there was another one on the back because that looked a little bit doggy as well. And a couple of lights and lanterns, and that's pretty much job done. So this will be the Ninja Woodfire's summertime home, where I do my future videos. There was already a hole drilled through the bottom there for an electrical supply. We've got an electrical supply just off camera here, and it looks quite nice sat next to the fig tree there. So I'm very much looking forward, now that our house is back in order, so hopefully some good weather that means that I can get the Ninja wood fire back out and start getting back to creating some more content for your viewing pleasure. I hope this is somewhat enjoyable to watch. I know it's not a barbecuing video, but I just wanted to, as I say, two things really, is document it for myself, the before and after, and for anybody that's interested in some of the kind of background stuff to the videos, just to give a little bit of insight. It is a very much a hobby channel, so apologies if the videos are a little bit kind of out of order. So I'm aware that I've got things at various points of editing, which include barbecue videos and some of the other stuff that goes into it. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope this shows that even somebody without any real DIY knowledge, with a bit of elbow grease and patience, you can actually save a few quid. So this, as I say, would have been about 600 quid, and then it would have needed painting anyway, and it was self-assembly, so it would still have been a job. So I'm quite happy with the saving that has been made, and actually that rather than just putting something up in the garden that I wasn't completely happy with, it has turned out pretty well, all being told. Hope to see you in videos in the near future. As always, I do read all the comments and respond, so if there's anything you'd like to know about this, please pop it in there. And as always, if you could subscribe, it really helps me out.